the 2020 Virtual Texas Houser Awards. Thank you so much for being a part of our community of housers, and thanks for joining us today. Today we honor some amazing people and celebrate all of you, our friends and supporters who continue to drive our work forward and give us so much hope. We wish this year were different. I'm sure you do too. No one could have predicted what 2020 has brought us. And even still, we're unsure about what's next in this public health crisis and in this divided country grappling with systemic racism. However, we have so many reasons to look forward to what could be. One thing we do know is that at Texas Housers, we are steadfast in our vision of a beloved community. We know that each Texan's life and fate is bound together with those of their neighbors, with each of us. And that's why we have to ensure that each neighborhood, each city in our state, is one where we all have what we need to enjoy our homes, our communities, our lives, and that all neighborhoods are ones where we can all thrive. So, what will it take to make such a simple vision a reality? Certainly, we rely on public officials to advance major policy change and major public investment in housing and community development. A new administration, a new Congress may get us part of the way. Sure, that would be a dream. But really, the hard work that has to happen is dependent on something so much more personal. The policies that are barriers to housing opportunity for so many are reflections of us, of our priorities, of our country's deeply rooted racist attitudes, whether we own up to it or not. That is what we have to confront and address. The vision for a beloved community relies not only on policies and investments, it calls for housing justice, for all of us caring about every person and realizing their stories and their lives are intertwined with ours. And then we fight like hell for every person, no matter where they come from, what they look like, or how much money is in their pocket. It's that hearts and minds stuff, not in a superficial marketing focus group kind of way, but a deep spiritual commitment to the vision for a beloved community. So Texas Housers is here for it, for all of the work ahead. We'll research and lobby and advocate for policies our communities deserve. But we're also connecting with communities, with our own neighbors, to build alliances of people who can share in that vision for a beloved community and carry that narrative to their friends and neighbors. We hope you're all part of that alliance. We live in a state with abundant resources in the richest country on the planet. Surely, there's space for everyone. There's enough for all of us to live in decent homes and great communities, regardless of income, race, or class. When we all buy into this narrative, when we truly believe in the beloved community, we can change the notion of what is possible in housing justice. So I'll let John give you more specifics about how we're doing that.
Thanks, Christina. What a year it's been. Last year, this time, we gathered in the Austin Public Library. There was no pandemic. Housing was still a secondary issue in this country. Since then, we've had a presidential election like no others. We've had an unprecedented degree of polarization, political polarization in this country. We've had more focus on housing than I thought I would ever see in my lifetime. Maybe more focus on housing than we've ever had in this country, going all the way back to the inception of government involvement in housing in 1937. The pandemic has kept people from being able to afford to pay their rent. And that's led to the federal government providing a moratorium on rent payment. I mean, we couldn't even imagine that idea back a year ago. The Trump administration has attacked housing integration in a way that no federal administration ever has, seeking to roll back the Housing Act of 1968, the Fair Housing Act, and actually has promoted segregation in housing as a federal policy. And then there was George Floyd. The country is now awakened to the issue of civil rights and inequality on the basis of race in a way that it hasn't been awakened since the 60s. And throw in a few hurricanes and other things going on, and this is a time that is truly unprecedented in housing. So when we talked back in November, last November, I introduced the notion that Texas Housers was going to do something big. And that was going to be to refocus our energy to support local community grassroots advocates to be agents for change, to be agents for promoting the four rights: the right to stay, the right to choose, the right to equal treatment, and the right to have a say. These four rights are to us the bedrock, the basis of what a progressive housing policy should be in this country. People should be able to freely choose. People shouldn't be locked into racially and economically segregated neighborhoods. People should have the right to stay and not be displaced by gentrification and be pushed out of historic communities. People should have the right to be treated equally by their government in terms of the public services, the infrastructure, the flood protection, all of the things that are missing in many low-income neighborhoods of color. And above all, people should have a right to have a say. This is a democracy, and public policy around housing and community development should not exclude people from being able to be part of the decision-making process over their homes and neighborhoods. So our idea was that we needed to go all in on the idea of supporting leaders in communities of color across Texas to be able to assert those four rights. And it's been really hard to do because of the pandemic. You know, we foresaw this was going to be an academy, basically a learning environment where people came together. We were modeling it after a civil rights initiative that was put in place prior to the Montgomery bus boycotts and the real kickoff of the civil rights movement, called the Highlander Academy, which was a place where activists got together and discussed the issues of civil rights and organizing for those rights. And we saw, a big circle of people who were supporting each other, talking about problems, taking on problems in their local community, and supporting each other to do that. And that's proven to be a little difficult in a time of pandemic when people can't travel and get together. But we've done it virtually. And Christina and some others are going to talk a little bit about that. That's the thing I'm proudest of that we've been able to do over the course of the last year. The other thing that I'm also very proud of that we've been able to do is to push back on the attacks of fair housing that have come from the Trump administration. Secretary Carson and the president basically have rolled back all of the initiatives that have been built since 1968 to promote the fair and equal access to housing by people of color. And there has been a firm resistance to those efforts on the part of this administration. I'm not here to tell you that we've been completely successful, but we file lawsuits. Others have filed lawsuits. We've worked in the court of public opinion. lots of media coverage. We had a Washington Post story that we worked with them for months on, focusing on George Floyd's growing up in public housing in Houston and how his life outcomes, where he ended up, might have actually been different. Not only the most important thing to change the policing system in this country, but also had he had an opportunity to grow up in a neighborhood where his mother felt would have been a better place for him to live. We've talked about the core of what the Academy is about and what this organization is really dedicated to is about problem solving. It's about individuals having agency and a role in making a decision about what's best for them and their family and their community. And that continues to be the core of what we believe. We're also moving toward this year something really important, which is a transition of leadership. I've led this organization with Karen as co-director for 33 years now. And it's time for me to step back and to let new leadership come in for this organization. I'm not going to go anywhere. I'm going to do something like federal judges do and sort of take senior status and continue to work on projects, particularly the Hauser Academy and asserting fair housing and trying to work with young people, both activists at the community level and people like our staff and people like the university students we've been working with for years who are looking for the correct role that they can take to be supportive of community activists to make the type of change that needs to happen. So over the course of the next 6 to 9 months, Christina is planning to move into the role of co-director with Karen of this organization. And I'll be still around, still doing the stuff, but I'm not going to lead the organization anymore. This final decision on this transition is, of course, subject to the board making the approval, but they've authorized me to announce this is what's intended. And we've taken the first step because Christina is, as you are aware, at the last meeting, designated as the deputy director of the organization. She is going to be fantastic. Christina is morally so sound and committed to these goals. She's a social worker by training, has a degree from University of Chicago, one of the most prestigious schools in social work. She's also a journalist, where she has a degree from Northwestern, and she was a reporter, a working reporter at the Dallas Morning News. She's also worked with the U.S. Civil Rights Commission. She knows this stuff backwards and forwards. She's as smart as anybody I've ever encountered, and I'm so excited that I'm going to be able to work for Christina in the coming years. As I've said, the real key to this organization and what we're going to stay dedicated to is the 4 rights. The right of people to choose where to live, the right of people to stay and not be displaced from their neighborhood, the right of people to be treated equally by their government in terms of access to the public programs and the resources for homes and flood control and streets and neighborhoods and schools. It's really hard to keep up with all of what's going on in our world. There are our staff, which is now 13 or 14 people, are working across multiple different locations in Texas on multiple different issues, all centered around local activists and their work. And I want to urge you to not just visit us once a year at these events. Now, that's obviously really important to us, and we couldn't do this work unless you support us financially through the Hausers and the Hauser event and the Hauser Awards and other things. But go to our website at texashausers.org, where we're reporting on what's going on out there, the outstanding work of these community organizations. And a new initiative that Christina and I have been working on pretty regularly over the last year is a podcast. And Christina and I, every week, produce a podcast on the issues that we see out there in housing and the things that people are working on and how people are advancing the four rights. So keep up with our work. We really appreciate your support of our work. It means everything to us. We couldn't do it without you. We're going on to do bigger and better things. These are exciting times. These are a little scary times too sometimes, but there is lots of progress to be made, and we really appreciate your support.
COVID-19 hasn't changed the mission or goals that Texas Housers has, but this pandemic has changed the way we have to do business. So here we are talking about our work during this pandemic.
Tenant organizing and outreach has been completely different under COVID.
For me, I'm a very outgoing, extroverted person. I like to talk to people. It gives me an idea or a sense of what they really need, and I get to read their body language. So as we move from, being able to go out and talk to people and touch people to Zoom, it's very hard to connect with people. So it's incredibly difficult to stay in the know on the best way to advocate on behalf of people. So figuring out ways to still stay in communication has been one of the main challenges during COVID.
We have to find creative ways to connect with our communities and with each other. So we're doing a lot of brown bag sessions. We are doing a lot of telephone community meetings. And we also just have to make sure that we're checking in with each other and making sure everyone is safe and has what they need.
We've tried to adapt and create kind of like weekly check-in calls, things that try and keep the community together and, remind us that we're not alone in all of this.
It's been hard for me to get ready for the legislative session just because I really like doing things face-to-face and Zoom meetings. We've all been to a million Zoom meetings, and so we know, we can understand how easy it is to get sick of them. There's also a lot of opportunity though with the session because we may be able to bring some voices in via Zoom who wouldn't be able to travel to Austin to testify.
Our mission is more important than ever under COVID-19 because the people who we were already advocating for are really susceptible to these interruptions in employment, housing instability, and the virus itself. I think it's really important to make sure that as we try to recover from this pandemic, or as we get ready for the next wave of the pandemic and the uptick in cases that we're seeing, that those people are centered in how we develop programs and policies, because there is no recovery without those people.
It's part of a cycle where if there are evictions, that pours more fuel on the virus spread because people move into cramped housing or they double up and then the virus resurges. But on the flip side, while the virus is bad, unemployment is going to spike and people have fewer opportunities. And so they're less likely to be able to pay for their homes. And so they're more likely to get evicted. So I think housing is a really important place to kind of intervene in the spread of the virus.
Texas Housers has always been a leader in understanding disaster recovery and making sure that we leverage the aid, the resources that come from a disaster to create opportunity. So despite the tragedy of this moment, it presents an opportunity for us to advocate housing justice. Right now, all of the inequality in housing in neighborhoods and communities is so magnified. Everyone is talking about it. So now we have to do something about it.
Thinking about what I've learned during the pandemic, I think I've just really come to appreciate the little breaks that I get, seeing my family during the day and all of that, and just hoping that as I'm able to work from home in a comfortable and safe place, that it feels really important than advocating for other people's housing.
All I'm seeing for the last couple of months is people trying to figure out how to communicate with each other during a time that none of us have ever been through. And so I would say, even for me personally, I understand that I'm a better a worker. I'm a better version of myself when I can connect with other people.
You just kind of roll with the punches, it's very tough to get a win, but once you get that win, it's something that you want to kind of, how would you say, dwell on, because there's, I guess, so many actions where it's working against low-income populations.
At the start of the pandemic, I was 6 months pregnant and I had my son in June. So I gave birth to my son at the hospital in a face mask, 10 hours of labor. So something I've learned during this pandemic and just looking around at people is that we are resilient. There's so much tragedy at the moment, but there's also so much to work for. So at this moment, a lot of the drive and motivation for my work in making a more just and inclusive Texas is my baby son. And I've learned that I can do anything when I have the right motivation.
The biggest impact I would say for COVID is just figuring out the ways that we can all still lean on each other even though we can't see each other physically, and making sure everyone knows that we're in this together. We may not be able to stand side by side in front of the building and protest, but we can still fight against any injustice or any, violation of rights that we're being confronted with.
I'm Michael Deepland, and I'm the Communications Manager for Texas Housers. At last year's Houser Awards, John talked about our new initiative, the Texas Houser Academy. Since then, we've recruited a dozen leaders from all across Texas: Lubbock, Fort Worth, Houston, Austin, and San Antonio. People we've been working with for some time to be the first class of Houser Academy Fellows. Originally, the group was supposed to gather in person to build rich relationships with one another, with our staff, and with our Houser community. The pandemic clearly changed that. For now, the group is taking virtual classes about messaging, organizing, and civil rights. They're learning about HUD programs, state law, and how to hold governments accountable. They also tell us what they want to learn, what they need to be successful advocates. We push them to teach their peers, to share their work, reach out to one another for help, and teach our staff too. The vision is for us to all be learners and teachers. Perhaps the most important part is that the group is putting this coursework to practical use in taking on an advocacy and power building project in their own communities.
Fellows are taking on ambitious projects. They include pushing for a Texas second chance housing bill for people with criminal histories, a demolition moratorium to preserve land and affordable homes in San Antonio's historic West Side, a citizen-led disaster recovery assistance team, and a community benefits agreement for neighborhoods at risk of being priced out in Houston. Recently, one of our fellows gave a presentation about how they're fighting a long history of racist zoning practices in Lubbock to a national audience for the National Fair Housing Alliance's conference. Less than a year into this effort, and these folks are true Housers. Texas Housers has been a voice for housing justice in this state for 30 years. But we can't do this work alone, and we can't do it for people. The Houser Academy puts people impacted by injustice at the forefront of this movement in Texas, and our staff and our allies stand at the ready to support their projects and their visions for housing justice. We hope to build on this year's class and widen our call for that beloved community over the coming months and years. You can meet some of our Texas Houser Academy fellows in this video that Michael produced.
What made me want to do more?
What made me want to do more?
What made me want to do more?
What made me want to do more is
I received an eviction notice for non-payment of rent, and I had paid my rent. The housing authority, the San Antonio Housing Authority, had added $1,200 in unauthorized pet fees to my account, and even though I had turned in the paperwork for the dog, and I fought it and I supposedly won, but they still had it on there. So I was making my rent payments each month, and they were applying my rent payments to the fee and evicted me for non-payment.
Realizing that home ownership is a huge financial tool, and we have been left out in that area deliberately, and I wanted to be able to help close that gap.
Living in San Antonio's most economically poor area, I know we didn't get here by accident. I know it wasn't one policy that got us here. So I know it's going to take a lot of work to change that, to shift that. Where I live, we're very hard workers. You could catch a bus like at 6 a.m. It's going to be the most packed bus of everybody going to work. And we're busy because we're always working, and all these decisions get made without us. And I decided to get involved because it was important that, you know, there's someone there who lives in the community and just paying attention to how everything's just moving forward and forward without actual community at the table. And it's not so much community being at the table, right? It's being at the table and being allowed to make decisions and, you know, have some food too. Not just being invited is not enough.
Returning home and seeing that my community had changed dramatically from the other communities in the city. The other communities had grown by leaps and bounds. They were becoming much more beautiful. There were new infrastructures, brand new schools. The community that I lived in and grew up in it had changed also, but it had become worse. So seeing that reality, just seeing the blatant disparities between communities made me want to do more.
In my neighborhood, there's a very strong sense of community. I know who my neighbors are. If anything happens, like a package is left and somebody's not home, like our neighbor will get it and hold on to it so it doesn't get stolen. Like, we know each other. We celebrate birthdays together. Like, it's a very strong sense of community.
The historical landmarks, as well as the culture and the people that actually reside there now. I think that it should be beautified as well.
My grandmother lives here, my great aunt lives here, my brother lives here, my friends live here. So those things are what's most important and what's worth saving in my community.
Often we hear all these negative stereotypes and perceptions of our community because we are economically poor, and honestly, even just saying that like bothers me. And it's just, we're always put in a negative light, right? And when it comes to change in the community, it's like, oh, this development coming, it's a gift to you all. It's almost as if we're viewed as like the Wild West in this blank slate where we should be happy with whatever's given to us. And it's like, no, we have our own culture that's worth preserving. We have our beautiful murals worth preserving. We have our shotgun home architecture worth preserving, because even with like the Office of Historic Preservation, they have identified places within our neighborhoods as historic, but they're Victorian homes. And it's like, okay, yeah, that's historic, but our shotgun homes are also worth preserving and like should be identified as historic. Preserving the existing community of the folks who want to stay here. I understand if you're given an opportunity to move and you want to, that's your choice, but we need to make sure that if community wants to stay, we're implementing mitigation measures that allow them to stay.
This is a historically redlined neighborhood. It was very segregated, and it's been largely ignored. So a lot of the systems that are in place in other sides of town are not here And I think it just needs to be brought up to date. And I think equal opportunity, equal resources, and then, holding people accountable.
The zoning and industrial uses,
it creates pollution. People's health are affected, and as a result, people leave the community, or those who stay are affected, whether it's with asthma or other things. It creates blight. The property value goes down. So there's no generational wealth that's being built in the community. So all of these things are kind of interrelated as a result of the heavy industries in the community. So the removal of those are crucial to the growth of the community.
What needs to be addressed is how our homeowner occupied rehabilitation programs are funded. We talk a lot about equity, but then, it's a lottery system on who gets help with their home. And it's usually like 16 homeowners per fiscal year. And it's like, is that equity? Is that helping us address the vast issues within our community? Infrastructure does need to be addressed. We've had sinkholes, but then at the same time, development's moving through and no one's making sure that the infrastructure is secure and can handle these tons of material running up and down our roads. We have a lot of seniors and there's holes within the sidewalks, so folks have to walk on the street with their strollers or their wheelchairs. I'm all for, green transportation and having bike lanes, but when community was here and needed this safe sidewalk, where were y'all? But now we're talking about bike lanes and all this other good stuff that doesn't really include making sure the existing community has access to it.
My ideal neighborhood starts with home. And in my home, I'm respected. I have a say. My kids are safe. And there's no fear of displacement. In my neighborhood, we work together to solve issues rather than having outside help come in. We are able to both preserve and upgrade the neighborhood. So yes to preserving the historical buildings, and yes to upgrading them with internet and air conditioning, things like that.
I like to say I'm a good old country girl. I don't require a whole lot. The essentials are important to a great neighborhood. When I think about the quality of the neighborhood, the quality of the air, the quality of the water, where when you bathe, it doesn't itch. When you come to your community, it just smells like fresh trees and flowers, and the landscape is beautiful, and you see families walking their dogs or their kids to school. You see no broken window syndrome, where all the homes are well taken care of. And because of the confidence in the community, there's hardly to any crime in the community. The perfect community is a community that's just filled with great resources that keep you healthy physically, mentally, and spiritually from what you see around you.
Homes that are not vacant, that are properly taken care of, where there can be families and there's growth in the community with proper representation of the people in the community, more ownership in things, and actually be able to leave a real stamp for our kids later on, and not just something that's temporary.
True power is just not necessarily the absence of financial resources, but power can be through the power of people.
It takes people to get there. The community has to come together and use their voice, because if everyone is dispersed and scattered and nobody speaks up, that's where developers and city employees come in and take over. If you don't make the decisions for yourself, someone else is going to step in and do it for you.
I believe it's going to take organizing and holding our elected officials accountable, and organizing around policy change or organizing around community benefits agreements. It's going to take people power, right? Because we're already at capacity with everything going on, and we need more folks to help push these things forward and demand like what's ours, because it's our public money used to fund all these projects. So we need to have a say. That's what keeps me going, is that it's community and ensuring that, folks who want to stay, we could stay here, and that we're not taken advantage of, because for far too long people have tried to, and they continue to try to, and they're not going to take our property, push our neighbors out without a fight.
I do believe that things can change, but I definitely also believe that we have to be the ones to change it. And I don't want my child to have to be the one in the fight. I would much rather do it.
You never know what small gesture can make a big impact in someone else's life. I think that each neighborhood should be able to design itself, and its own community should be the leaders.
Like, one thing that I would like people to consider when we're talking about development is that it's not just new buildings, concrete, and streets and sidewalks. There are existing communities here, and we need to take into account on how this impacts the way they navigate space, and just overall who has access to spaces. I love my community. I love the historic West Side, and I think we're all worth it. Everything's worth preserving.
While there has been a lot of no's, there has been some not necessarily no's, but not right nows. So that, to me, that's a yes. We do have a lot going on, and sometimes the mountains, they seem so high, but when you lay it out, it's like you feel like they are reachable. They're obtainable. It can't stay like this. It has to change, and that's what motivates me to know that eventually it will change. I just have faith that it will.
And now our staff will present awards to our 2020 Texas Houser Award honorees.
Hi everybody, I'm Adam Pirtle, and it's my honor to present Mr. Milton Lee with the Houser Award today. As the president of NAACP Lubbock Branch 6198, Mr. Lee has led the efforts of members of the NAACP, neighborhood leaders, and other citizens to challenge and change Lubbock's systemically racist zoning practices, which have concentrated industrial zoning in Lubbock's black and brown neighborhoods for nearly 100 years. The overwhelming presence of polluting industry in neighborhoods like Chapman Hill has harmed residents by causing major health concerns, led to declining property value, caused numerous nuisances for residents, and stood in the way of community development efforts. After the community advocated for downzoning in two separate city-led processes, first during the comprehensive plan in 2018, and second during the city's efforts to update its analysis of impediments to fair housing, Mr. Lee and the NAACP filed a fair housing complaint with the Department of Housing and Urban Development against the city when city leaders refused to make the changes that residents had demanded. This fight ended up not only being against the city of Lubbock, but against a national administration that works to betray the 14th Amendment and the Fair Housing Act's promise of equal treatment in neighborhoods. The struggle continues and the fight is not over, and I want to acknowledge the other leaders in this fight as well. Natalie Ayers, Audriana Edwards, Roger Wongwan, Robert Baxter, Diana Thomas, Dora Cortez, Carolyn Rollison, Billy Russell, Tina Betts, and many others. We honor you today as well. Milton Lee began his fight to secure the civil rights of Lubbock citizens after serving in our nation's military, retiring as a master sergeant. After serving in an integrated military, it was a shock for him to return to Lubbock, where so many vestiges of Jim Crow remained. He's been a leader in the fight for civil rights and equal treatment ever since. He's also been a champion of the children growing up in East Lubbock. He served as the council president of all Lubbock ISD PTA organizations. He's a past president and current board member of the Boys and Girls Club, and he's a member of One Lubbock, a group working with Habitat for Humanity to spur economic development. Over the course of my time in Lubbock, Mr. Lee and I have had many long talks and worked together closely. He's taught me a great deal about what it means to be a citizen and what it means to fulfill the obligation of every American to make sure that all of our fellow citizens have equal opportunity to achieve our country's promise. More importantly, he continues to lead the city of Lubbock down that path. Milton, I'm so honored to give you this award today. Thank you so much for your work, and I look forward to continuing to work with you.
Well, I want to thank Adam and all those who had a part in this award that I am receiving on behalf of the NAACP. And I had a great group of people that was working with me along with Adam and John. And so we appreciate this award, and we can use it for the betterment and show that good things can happen to those who pursue the things that they feel are right in a community, for a community. So Adam, I thank you. I thank John and all the others who had a part in this.
The Blackland Community Development Corporation's story is one of being a developer, owning and managing at least 56 affordable homes. It is a story of negotiating on behalf of a low-income neighborhood, and the story of one neighborhood's take on creating Dr. King's beloved community. The organization originated in response to the University of Texas plan to acquire the neighborhood. UT acquisitions grew out of the city's 1928 master plan, which called for relocating people of color east of I-35. In the 1950s, using eminent domain power with the city, UT acquired the blocks where the UT baseball stadium stands. In 1983, when residents discovered a realtor buying property, many were sure that the university had come back to take the rest of the neighborhood. But some residents had another idea. They would fight for their community. Using a combination of tactics, like hoisting a banner questioning UT's plan at the precise point where the TV cameras would focus on baseballs hit out of the stadium, Blackland made its case a citywide issue, which resulted in the city awarding Blackland enough money to build its first 11 homes. When a national campaign to make vacant government buildings house the homeless came to Austin, Blackland organized a protest in which homeless people and their goose is a story in itself. You can find it on our website. The homeless people and their goose spent the night in a former tourist court owned by UT in the Blackland neighborhood. By 8 a.m. the next morning, UT police in riot gear surrounded the men and their goose. Eventually, with the help of our board president, V.L. McReynolds, who found doors to more reasonable heads at the university, Blackland and UT negotiated a compromise in which the university gave or sold property east of Leona Street to Blackland. The homeless people's support inspired the board to recruit construction volunteers to fix up the houses and rent them to homeless families, as well as to raise the money to pay a social worker to help the families get back on track to being in permanent housing. Blackland goes beyond building housing to building a community. Maybe a community of volunteers lacks construction skills, but has arranged weekly donations of fresh food and cut flowers from Wheatsville and Whole Foods. Blackland maintains gardens that are accessible to people in wheelchairs. At its Fannie Mae Stewart Conservatory, named for Miss Stewart, who was a prodigious knitter, Blackland offers opportunities to preserve domestic arts, such as knitting and quilting. Blackland's motto, "The Dream Starts Here," refers to the beloved communities, the concept that Dr. King promoted. And a lesser-known aspect of the concept of the beloved community is the role of negotiation. I was going to liken the struggle between Blackland and UT to David and Goliath, but that would overlook how this relationship changed from an adversarial to one in which the two can collaborate on issues of joint interest. With the scepter of the university's power restricted, the issue roiling Blackland now is gentrification. Blackland continues to develop the community in the community's interest and negotiate. Blackland inserted in its neighborhood plan an incentive formula so that developers can build more units if they include some affordable units. Neighborhood leaders actively seek out developers thinking of buying, selling, or building in the neighborhood and explain to them Blackland's commitment to diversity and inclusion. This has attracted some and self-eliminated some others. It led to one apartment builder selling his apartments to Blackland, adding to the community's affordable inventory. Blackland is currently negotiating the acquisition of a unit created through affordability incentives. If Blackland can buy that unit, they'll be able to lower the rents to deepen affordability as well as to lengthen the affordability period of that home. We worked for Blackland in its early days with its founders, Catherine Poole, Charles Smith, Alice Nenward, June Brewer, and Bo McCarver. Since then, Blackland has grown, with many neighbors taking a turn at serving on the board. The neighborhood now owns 20% of its residential housing stock, a permanent resource for affordability, and a constructive example of diversity and inclusion. For these reasons, I am proud to give a 2020 Hauser Award to the Blackland Community Development Corporation.
Hi, I'm Austin Dennis, President of the Board of Directors for Blackland Community Development Corporation. On behalf of BCDC, I want to thank Texas Housers for recognizing us with this year's Texas Housers Award. It's such a great honor to have our organization recognized for its contribution to our residents, the Blackland neighborhood, and the city of Austin. Over the past 37 years, BCDC has been committed to fostering a safe, sustainable, and inclusive community, and we've done that by enhancing and preserving the stock of affordable housing and providing supportive programs to the Blackland neighborhood. Over these years, we've had the privilege to serve over 300 families, and that wouldn't have been possible without the many board members, staff, volunteers, and community partners that have been part of BCDC throughout the years. As many of us are keenly aware, these are really difficult times for many, but here at BCDC, we're looking forward, and we're only more entrenched in our commitment to make sure that our neighborhood and community continues to be safe, sustainable, and inclusive for many more years to come. With that, I'd like to thank the Texas Housers for the work that they do and reiterate how honored we are to receive this award. Thank you.
Buenas tardes y gracias por seguir con nosotros. Mi nombre es Julia Orduña y me siento orgullosa en entregar nuestro siguiente reconocimiento a una gran inspiración y fronteriza como yo, Toñita Morales, cariñosamente llamada Toñita. Es un ejemplo de valor, fortaleza y una inspiración de cómo un punto de resistencia puede resonar y crear un gran impacto. Good afternoon. Thank you for continuing this journey with us. My name is Julia Orduña, and I am proud to present our next award to a great inspiration and resident of the border like myself. Toñita Morales, lovingly called Toñita, is an inspiration of courage, strength, and an example of how one point of resistance can resonate and cause a great impact. Toñita lives in the neighborhood of Duranguito, an area that was known for its versatility, a mixture of the history of the land told by the facade of century-old buildings and the development of the future shaped by the culturally diverse businesses in the couple-block radius of Duranguito. A city ordinance was passed over a decade ago, boasting of a cultural and performing arts center. But residents slowly started to see the city's true colors when the opportunity to raise this historic area for a sports center arose. A money-making machine that will generate big dollars for the city and whose concept of profit over people leaves residents like Toñita without a voice or a home. But Toñita said no. Firme. She stood her ground and chose to stay. That is her right, su derecho. She wasn't the only one, but she wasn't part of the majority either. The lure of a relocation settlement was not enough to sway this pillar of the community. Con fortaleza, her strength is rooted in her determination and courage to stand up for the neighborhood she has helped shape over the decades. Toñita is a neighborhood advocate by keeping an eye on redevelopment promises and contributing as a citizen to her city's plan. We know that democracy knows no limits, neither language nor borders. Educational or economic status can stand in the way of a true leader, and Toñita is a prime example of this. Con valor, a woman in her 90s has the courage to speak up for her neighborhood, even with attempts to bulldoze buildings by her very footsteps. She has stayed steadfast. Toñita has asked the city for renovation and remembrance rather than demolition of businesses, culture, and homes in the arena's shadow. A community has rallied around her. Dios dijo que con fe del tamaño de un grano de mostaza se puede mover montañas. Gracias, Toñita, por enseñarnos cómo sembrar estas semillas en nuestra comunidad. Tengo el honor y con gran placer que presento este reconocimiento Texas Housers 2020 a Toñita Morales. God said that with faith the size of a mustard seed, we can move mountains. Thank you, Toñita, for showing us how to grow these seeds in our community. I am honored, and it is with great pleasure that I present this 2020 Hauser Award to Toñita Morales.
Muy buenas tardes. Esta entrevista que me están haciendo es para agradecerles a la organización de Texas House para reconocer el trabajo que yo hice en esta comunidad. Quiero decirles que yo llegué en el 65 a esta comunidad a vivir y encontré una comunidad muy sucia, llena de prostitución, llena de droga, llena de gente que robaba, mucha droga, se inyectaban, no había luces en los callejones, era muy poco el alumbrado, pero sí había muchos, pero muchos niños de primaria y muchos niños de high school, muchas jovencitas de high school. Entonces no me gustó para nada la comunidad y no me gustaba que los niños vieran cosas que no debían de ver. Entonces me puse y investigué cómo podría trabajar, cómo podría hacer para quitar todo esto, y una persona me dijo que había una organización que hacía este trabajo y me entrevistó con una de las muchachas que ya se iban para San Antonio, y ella me dijo cómo se podía trabajar y todo, y comencé, entrevisté, vi a otra vecina y fuimos con la policía y les pedí ayuda y les dije lo que quería hacer, que quería limpiar esta comunidad por los niños, por los jóvenes, y así fue como comencé y logré, gracias a Dios que logré mi propósito, y la policía nos ayudó, nos quitaron todos los carros abandonados, a todos los drogaditos y todo, y había un policía que debo reconocer que fue un hombre muy valioso para nosotros porque nos ayudó mucho. A él no le gustaba ver tanta suciedad y todo, y nos decía, cuiden mucho que los niños no se vayan a picar con las jeringas esas donde se inyectaban, y así comencé a trabajar, y gracias a Dios que logré con mis vecinos y con la policía y todos logramos hacer de aquí una comunidad limpia y segura. Ahora tenemos una comunidad limpia y segura, los niños pudieron vivir felices, sin peligro. Después ahí vino la policía, puso un departamento de policía aquí y los bomberos, y ellos pusieron un pedacito de parque y allí jugaban los niños y se compuso este barrio. Pueden venir y ver que tenemos un barrio limpio y seguro, ya no tenemos droga, ya no tenemos, y también nosotros los adultos vivimos tranquilos y todo. Luché mucho por tener un barrio limpio y seguro, pero ahora estoy batallando mucho porque la ciudad nos quiere quitar nuestros barrios, quieren destruir nuestras viviendas para hacer una arena. Y no estoy de acuerdo que la hagan aquí, porque estos barrios que destruyen nuestros barrios, nuestras historias, nuestras leyendas, porque estos barrios fueron los primeros barrios de una ciudad, fue la historia de una ciudad. No estoy de acuerdo que vengan a destruirnos nuestras viviendas para hacer una arena, como no estuve de acuerdo que hicieran un estadio ni un centro cívico, porque yo sabía que no iba a tener tanto como ellos dijeron, que iban a dar mucho dinero a la ciudad, y son mentiras. No se venden tantos boletos en el estadio. Yo vivo aquí por muchos años y no ha dado resultado el centro cívico, así es de que no estoy de acuerdo en que nos destruyan nuestras viviendas, nuestras leyendas, nuestras historias por una arena que no va a dar beneficios a ninguno, a la ciudad, a los ciudadanos, a los residentes. Les doy las gracias no tanto por mi trabajo que yo hice, sino que vean que organizaciones como ustedes reconocen cuando las personas trabajamos por algo, aunque sea poquito y sencillo, pero que vean que trabajamos por algo bueno para nuestra ciudad, para nuestras comunidades, para nuestros niños, para nuestra gente.